Well, here we are. Thank you, everyone, for the fourth session at the Mobile Growth Summit. My name is Eddie Arrieta. I'm the head of communications at Torre, that's Torre.co. Today, reaching a global audience. Our moderator is going to be Mr. Ali Jamal, head of growth and performance marketing at Click. Ali, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited for this panel. We're going to be discussing a lot about global marketing and growth and how to reach new audiences. And we have a really great panel for everybody. But before I jump in, I kind of want to just quickly introduce myself. I'm Ali Jamal. I am currently the head of performance marketing and growth at Clip in Mexico. I started my career back in the States working in investment banking, spent some years as a data scientist, and then worked in the gaming industry as a product manager, and then eventually in growth. I moved to Thailand and worked for Agoda for a couple of years in their marketing innovation efforts. And then spent last year at Rappi in Colombia working with Scott, and moved to Mexico in January. So have a wide background of experiences, and which is really kind of why I'm so excited about this panel, because everybody here has had a variety of experiences at a bunch of different places as well, and across different markets globally. So I think it's going to be really exciting. I'd love for you guys to kind of just quickly introduce yourselves. So why don't we start with Charlie and kind of just go from there.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie. I'm based here also in Mexico City and really excited to be here today. I'm currently the head of growth at Going Merry, which is a scholarships and financial aid portal. But I actually began my career in climate change research right here in Latin America, so based in Colombia. I then moved with the Climate Change Research Organization to India, Sri Lanka, and finally South Africa. And there in South Africa, I pivoted to join Prodigy Finance, which is a fintech startup as its number 6 hire. At the time, it was a seed stage company with customers in over 100 different countries. But now it's raised $1.3 billion to date. After that, I joined a Zambian mobile money company, overseeing its savings product and then its growth team across multiple sub-Saharan African markets. And I have personally lived in 9 countries across 5 continents. So I am excited to kind of share that global experience and insight here today.
Scott, do you want to give an introduction?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. First of all, just at the top of this, where I come from, New Jersey, and I wouldn't be here without my dad. Today is his birthday, so I wanted to say happy birthday. I know he's watching. My first job coming out of Rutgers University, New Jersey, was at Universal Music Group back in pre-iPhone days. Slinging ringtones and wallpapers and other mobile content, growing our audience on mobile, on flip phones back in those days for artists like Lil Wayne, Drake, Taylor Swift, Jack Johnson. So it started very early on, and then the iPhone came out, and everything kind of changed from there. And so since then I've led performance marketing teams, marketing organizations at Zynga, Blue Mobile, SwiftKey, which was acquired by Microsoft, as well as Drive Mode, which was acquired by Honda. And I'm currently consulting Rappi as head of marketing partnerships, bringing on new partners, and growing with the team.
Great. And I don't know if we lost Sunny. If you can, Sunny, are you still on the audio? Can you hear us? All right, we can maybe have him join back when and introduce himself when he can rejoin. I know he's having some technical issues. I'd love to learn more about how you got introduced to growth. Like, it's kind of a unique career path that's kind of just started, you know, the last X number of years. And so what was your kind of first introduction, and how did you start down that path, and what drew you to it? I guess, Scott, do you want to?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, really the first iteration of what we're doing now was at Glue Mobile, as they pivoted from making games for flip phones into, you know, smartphone games. We were doing burst campaigns on Tabjoy and, you know, bursting up the charts, and it had no tracking. And so that I brought in Tune when they first launched to be an MMP. We were probably the first big to track. A challenge is still, you know, we're working through till this day, you know. So we work closely with the Tune team to build up their entire platform at Glue, and so that's really where I was introduced to mobile growth, and kind of like the genesis of kind of what we're all doing today, and we're all kind of evolving with today.
Charlie, do you want to maybe talk a little bit how you got introduced to it, and what drew you to the field?
Yeah, sure. So I probably began what was then not termed as growth, but effectively doing growth with Prodigy Finance when I was, so that was the fintech where I was like number 6. And kind of at that stage, my title was business development and marketing manager, but like when you're 6 people, you do everything. Yeah. And so it was a really nice way to actually see all the different parts of the company and realize that the things that I was personally drawn to were, you know, like marketing and product and data and partnerships, which, you know, today we've kind of like seen that nexus and called it growth, or like divided it in different ways and called it, you know, performance marketing or whatever. So after that, I then like took on kind of growth adjacent roles. So like marketing for a company and products for another, but kind of realized that like my happy place is where all of those meet. And so I'm sort of back in growth and very happy to be sort of back in that kind of role.
And I'd love to hear about like your careers have taken you all these different places. I'd love to hear about how you ended up in LATAM.
I have an interesting story about how I ended up in LATAM the first time. Prior to the acquisition of Swifty by Microsoft, I was basically going back and forth between San Francisco and London, where they were based, which was exhausting. And so I took some time after that and went to South America, to Brazil for the World Cup. And while I was in Brazil at the World Cup, I was consulting kind of like with companies that wanted to, like I was kind of on this working hybrid vacation. And so I would go to a game. I went to see a France game in Rio at the Maracanã. And then the next day I went to Barra de Juca, which is, headquartered for one of the biggest gaming studios there, and had a meeting with the head of gaming to sell them on an MMP that I was consulting for at the time. And so I was doing that as I was traveling through LATAM. I went to Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and I was trying to reach out to people in all these different places. And I started doing that every single trip I ever went on. If I ever took like a hiatus or went somewhere, Southeast Asia, I did this. I've always tried to turn it into connecting with people, not just socially, but also professionally. And so that was my first introduction. And so that's, I had experience with Colombia, lived in Bogota for a bit, consulting after that Brazil experience. And so when Rappi came calling, it wasn't really that foreign to me. And so it was easier to jump in than it might've been for someone who hadn't done it before.
Charlie, do you want to talk about how you ended up here as well? I feel like you also had a pretty interesting path.
You can't hear us, I don't think. So, Charlie, we'll jump over to Charlie.
Hi, sorry. The muting of microphone and unmuting was not being my friend, so I will not unmute anymore. But yeah, so I mean, I kind of like, I suppose Scott, I it's not really ending up here. It's maybe coming back here. So for my undergrad, I studied international relations with like a Latin America regional focus. And out of basically graduating from undergrad, I got what was then probably pretty close to my dream job, which was doing climate change research and looking at its effects in the region. So that was in Colombia, and then life sort of weirdly took me to Southern Africa, where I then ended up for 8 years. But after being a bit burnt out, my partner and I took a year and a half to travel around the world. And like Mexico City, I fell back in love with, and I'd always kind of had an affinity to this region, wanted to come back. So now working for a remote company, like I've got to choose where I'd be based, and like this is it. So there's more of like a personal choice at this point.
Yeah, I think we're all simpatico as like these digital nomads, and certainly in Mexico City, we all kind of feel the same way about regarding LATAM. It's a special place I think for all of us. I feel that too. A lot of it's tied to the food.
Yeah. Sonny, do you want to try introducing yourself again? Sorry, I think
yes,
the audio
for sure. I'm really sorry for the delay on my end, but is it audible very clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So hello everyone, and I'm really excited to be a part of the summit along with this great panel. I came to Mexico City 5 months back, and right now I am heading the regional marketing performance operations at Linio at Mexico headquarters. We have operations across other Spanish-speaking Latin American countries. Prior to this experience, I was heading largely performance marketing-driven roles in India across various other e-commerce companies like Flipkart, Snapdeal, eBay, to name a few. My experience has largely been around handling the digital channels and driving the best efficiencies out of them. But apart from that, I have spent a good time also around technology, product, operations, etc. And I'm really happy to be a part of this panel today. Thank you so much.
Great. I'd love to hear about what the work experience has been like for you guys, in LATAM or some of these markets that you've worked in versus kind of the U.S. market or other markets that you worked in. So I'd love to kind of hear the comparison of that evolution and what you're seeing and how it's feeling.
Maybe I can start. So I think one of the things that I see really different from my experience, like here in Latin America, is the problem that we are looking to solve as far as e-commerce is concerned. Now, back in India, in the e-commerce world, I think we are still trying to solve the problem of convenience, convincing people to trust the online mediums, and like the internet penetration, etc. What I feel with my limited experience till now in LATAM, I think we have gone above these problems here. No, so I would say, like in terms of evolution, we are at a higher stage than some of the markets in Asia, probably, with much higher internet penetration. The problems that we're looking to solve here are more on the future of profitability. For example, how do we convince people to pay for subscription models? People are ready to pay for faster delivery times, for convenience, etc. So I think this is one of the stark differences that I found quickly when I arrived here.
Scott, what about you? What are some of the differences that you see?
As far as work culture, it's something that stuck out to me at Rappi in particular, is just the work culture, the speed. They work like a Series A startup that is 4,000 people, which is incredible. So that's something that was interesting to me as far as like work culture at that particular company. It says a lot about why they've grown so fast. And then there's also quirky things like everyone uses WhatsApp to communicate. You're in WhatsApp groups because that's what everyone uses down in Latin America. You're in WhatsApp groups with 100 people, and it's hard to keep track of, task management, who's responsible for who, how do you follow up, how do you, find out what those tasks were. So you try and bring in some of these, tactics that we're using in North America in the past, like Slack and email, and bring some more discipline to how people communicate. But with Rappi, that's how they grew so fast, right? They use WhatsApp, they make decisions quickly, and they execute on them. But when you get to a scale, you have to kind of pull that in and figure out how to organize a little bit better. And so that's what I've been trying to do as well. And we're being successful at doing that. But that's been very interesting from my perspective.
So I just have one more point. Interesting, Scott, since you discussed about the culture. I think I definitely agree with you on that part, that I also feel the same, that informal modes of communication are much more prevalent. And that took me a bit by surprise, because there aren't enough emails in my box, but in my box, I see so many chat groups and so many chat communication. Sometimes it becomes difficult to follow, but I think there is a benefit also to it, because it gives you more spontaneous response, and you don't have to worry about framing the email in the right way before you reaching out. No, so it's much faster to also react. But as you say, it has its own pros and cons. But I was a bit surprised with the way people communicate here, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah, they just move quickly.
It's more informal, and it's different.
Cultural, for sure.
Yeah.
Charlie, do you want to talk about your experiences? Because it's not just LATAM for you; it's kind of globally in Africa and in Asia and everything. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think so. I've never worked for a tech company in Latin America. I work part-time at a circus school as a teacher, and I've worked as a climate change researcher. And so based on that very strange, different experience, I would say that I think in LATAM, at least compared to sub-Saharan Africa, there's less of a sense of hierarchy in the firms that I've worked with, at least. So, I think that there's a sense of informality between people from different ranks that might be, I guess, more common in North America or in other parts in LATAM, versus in sub-Saharan Africa. I think there is this structure of I don't then talk to my superiors in a certain way, or I won't sit with them at the lunch table or whatever, because they're going to sit with the other managers. And I think that as a manager, how you deal with that is important, right? To be able to actually then get true feedback and ideas from people in that kind of environment means that you have to make a point of sitting with them at the lunch table, or initiating conversations. And I found that I needed to do that less in LATAM than I did in kind of other markets. And maybe is something for Europeans or Americans to keep in mind if they're working in other markets.
Yeah, LATAM is the organization seems very, at least a Rappi is flat. Everyone wears multiple hats. You kind of pivot to different things. There's a lot of heads of, I'm head of marketing partnerships, but basically what that means is I manage all the partnerships that aren't Facebook and Google. So it's all the tech companies like Snapchat, TikTok, Pinterest, down the line, Apple, Twitter. But there's heads of growth that handle certain types of areas, but it's all flat, and so we all could jump over into different projects, and it's very it's easy to move across projects and do different things. It keeps it interesting and fresh.
And what about the transition? You guys were kind of talking a lot about the different WhatsApp groups and how you're kind of now constantly being able to be kind of spammed with messages or whatever. Does that affect the work-life balance and what is the feel of the kind of kind of talked a little bit about kind of the more flat structure, but what does that actually feel like? I guess in that transition. And did you have any tips or tricks on things that you've done to kind of keep the work-life balance or to Charlie was kind of mentioning how she makes an effort to kind of reach out to, or just have to reach out as much as she did in other places. What are some of the other things that you do to ease that transition?
Well, for me, I haven't really faced a big concern because of this on work-life balance. But the larger concerns that I see is to track the things or manage it in a better way, because there are so many things happening, and I tend to miss some of the communication. I'm more used to the communications on the emails. But I personally, I haven't seen a big impact on work-life experience because of this.
I think you probably see that bleeding over a bit more, not only due to the different variety of like WhatsApp, email, Slack, whatever, but also if you're working in multiple markets with different time zones. I think that's probably the bigger issue, is then like suddenly you are responsible potentially for answering requests like in a time zone 12 hours different from yours. And there, I think it's about like setting boundaries of when you will respond and being really clear about like, I'm on during these hours and off during these hours. But I think that's the challenge of having a more global market, that maybe is not as much of a challenge if you have like a really regional one. Like when I worked for Sub-Saharan African markets, we're all on the same time zone at least, versus for Prodigy, like we serviced people in up to 150 different countries. And so like, that's a real challenge.
Yeah, we're all not just marketers that are, setting the marketing strategy, messaging, targeting, audience creative, whatever. We're management. And so we need to build the organization, build best practices. And that includes, how you message, when you message, what are the best, what's important and what's not. That's evolving always, especially in a startup. If we're at Series A, you're always on. Series D, maybe you're not. There's more of a balance there. So, it really just evolves over time.
So one of the things that I find interesting is that you guys have all, again, kind of approached different markets, and so you've seen things in different ways. And so, when you're approaching a new market, or when you're approaching a market in LATAM, how are you thinking about growth, and how does that approach differ from how you were thinking about or looking at growth in other markets? Sunny, do you want to start? Because
I look at it like a lot like the EU. Like LATAM is not monolithic, just like the EU.
Yeah.
Every country is different. Everything needs to be localized. Obviously, you have the big Brazil, which is completely different than every other market. But you have different dialects and different messages in every country. So you really need to set your marketing strategy at a country by country level and build the organization from the ground up, rather than centrally down and trying to like have one size fits all strategy in LATAM, because it's just not like that. It's an easy way to coin it as Latin America, but just like the EU, everything is different, and you have to treat it that way. And the best way to do that is to have local people on the ground.
Just continuing that thought, Scott, forward. I think what we really feel is like, for example, like right now I'm sitting in Mexico, and I have a regional team, but they are also responsible for managing campaigns in Peru, in Chile, or rest of the Latin American markets. No, hence there are these subtle differences that we need to think about in terms of communication, in terms of the words, etc. So one size does not fit all is still the formula, but still there are many strategic things that you need to imbibe. No, so our strategy is to like think regional but act local. You need to like think about structures or frameworks in the regional way. But when it comes to on-ground implementation, it has to be localized. No? The other thing that I realized is different in LATAM as compared to my other experience is the sudden spikes. There are some days or few days where you see a huge spike. And this is something slightly different than my other experience, because what you need is like you need to build the right systems to ensure that you can support that single day growth suddenly, and how to do it more efficiently. So you have to build the right infrastructure or the way you manage the campaigns so that it can support that kind of growth, because these days are really important for driving the numbers, and you need to build the right frameworks for that.
Yeah, I think there are also, so absolutely agree with both Scott and Sunny that, that localization and differences both between and within countries is important. But I think there are some things that are pretty consistent across emerging markets that do make them quite different from developed markets. So for instance, in most emerging markets, people are truly mobile first, right? Like they got access to internet or personal internet through mobile devices first. I read a report recently that like 30% of smartphone users in emerging markets have purchased an item through their mobile phones versus only 13% in developed markets. So like the way you deal with these kind of audiences is like you have a unique opportunities because they are mobile first. At the same time, one of the other, I think common challenges across these markets is like reach. So still smartphones and data are expensive in a lot of these markets. And so you need to think about things like, how do we have low data versions of our apps or of these websites? And how do we have a way for people to purchase our product or services outside of a mobile app? Like in Latin America, for instance, Argentina is the country, I believe, with the highest smartphone penetration. And that's 47% compared to like the UK or the US, where that's about 80%. So that's like a massive drop in the percentage of people who will actually be able to access your products if all you have is an Android or iOS app. And so really thinking beyond the structures that work in developed markets, I think is important if you're going to enter kind of these emerging markets, whether it be LATAM or parts of South Asia or Africa.
I'd love to learn more about like what you guys see as the biggest challenges that you're facing in LATAM, and like if there's some LATAM specific challenges that you're seeing, or if you just want to talk about in general what the biggest challenges are in mobile growth. Would love to hear your perspective. Does anybody want to start?
I would just think, I spoke about it before. Fragmentation could be a challenge, between the different markets. Localization could be a challenge, certainly. So you need to have a good strategy on how you're going to handle all that. And COVID-19 obviously is having a big impact, and that's the elephant in the room, but that's actually kind of helping a lot of growth marketers because there's a lot of organics that are coming in for certain verticals like gaming or food delivery, like Rappi. So that's there's both sides of that coin. It's impacting Ubers and Cabifys of the world and Didis, but it's helping the Rappis of the world. So that's a big challenge right now. But in general, I think the fragmentation across the different countries and localization would be the main thing.
Okay, so how do you guys approach localization, or how are you thinking about localization? I guess because I'm guessing that localization is probably going to be the number one problem that you guys are all kind of seeing. It was kind of a trend that you guys had set before. So I guess what are the approaches that you guys are taking to localize better? And like in the US, for example, you don't usually think about having a separate campaign for the South versus the West Coast, but are you guys doing separate campaigns for Mexico City versus other regions of Mexico, or for Medellin versus Bogota, or how are you guys approaching that? I'd love to kind of hear, for Charlie, like what you're seeing kind of across the different markets and how you guys are localizing as well. Scott, do you want to talk about what you're seeing at Rappi?
Well, we kind of built the structure from the ground, from bottom up. It was going top down from Bogota into the different territories. And what we try to do is empower the local people on the ground there to build the brand strategy, build the messaging, the creative, the A/B testing different things, and then filter that back up to HQ, where we had best practices for executing on the marketing strategy and the growth strategy. So, basically it's like like I said, going from the ground up. We restructured a lot where we're separating it rather than like having a meeting where we're going to go, okay, this is what we're going to do in these countries. We have a different country meeting every week to talk about what we're doing in that country. And so it's more country specific rather than LATAM and figuring it out, right?
Uh-huh. Well, at Linio, the way we have tried to solve this problem is like we have two kinds of team in the headquarters. It's like one team is the one, like for example, the automation team, like the ones which drives advertisements through product feeds, no, where you can't have you don't have a lot of leverage to play with communication or creatives, etc. No, so it's like more centralized, that there's one team which is handling for the entire region, but there are other campaigns, for example, like text ad campaigns or some manual Facebook creative campaigns, etc., which have like specific teams dedicated for each country. We have some people sitting in the headquarters. There are also some people in the local countries. to manage the same.
Yeah, I guess you guys have talked a lot about the Latin America experience. I guess I'll pitch in about what we did when running multiple Southern African markets. So there were a few things that we did, but they were mostly around like really honestly user like research. So both qualitative stuff, so getting boots on the ground to do user interviews, pitch tests, focus groups, like user testing, like observing people using our product, as well as all your like quantitative things, so like segmenting people based on data and that sort of thing. And I think that is actually crucial to being able to localize well. So we learned all kinds of things. So like in Malawi, which is unfortunately the poorest country in the world, we saw really low technological capacity there. And so, for instance, there we found that like flat buttons never worked. People couldn't figure out how to like click on them. They didn't think that they looked like buttons. So we had to like bring back the 90s style bevel with dropped like shadow and everything. And so I think just understanding how consumers will interact with your products in different markets is important, and always making sure that you're kind of user testing as you're expanding to new markets.
I think we have an audience question from Pedro, and we lost Ali, so I guess I'll take over the moderating.
The leadership with Scott. Thank you.
I'll invoice them later. This question's for Sunny. When you implement the think regionally, act locally approach to growth, where do you draw the line? At the growth channel level, at the campaign level, or at the creative level?
So the way we manage is mostly divided by campaigns, but as I was mentioning in the other half, so it's like a complex structure. It's slightly different than the traditional methods, because for each, it's not like we have a dedicated team for each country which handles all the channels. We have one team which is handling the automation channel across all the countries. Then we have a different team which is managing the manual channels specifically dedicated to one country. So there is one team which is doing, like, for example, all the manual creative work, and interacting with the local teams, designers, etc. They're still sitting in the regional team, but they are acting locally because their priorities is to ensure that in that country that they're managing, they need to be on top of it.
I have a question. I think there's a couple questions here for Ali. Ali, I kind of took over moderating as you dropped out. Are you back with us? I see you, but one of the questions, maybe I'll put it over to Charlie. In LATAM, income inequality is very high. How do you incorporate this into your LTV analysis and setting KPIs to your growth strategies?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is true about a lot of emerging markets as well. But yeah, Latin America is the region with the highest Gini coefficient. So I think one is you let the data speak. So in terms of your LTV analysis, that is literally looking at your users and being able to segment them and say, like, these are, users who look similar and they have this LTV, and these are users who look similar in a different way and they have a different LTV. And why that's important is, like, you might then say, we will spend a certain amount to keep this customer, and we might spend a different amount to keep a different customer. In terms of setting KPIs to growth strategies, I think one of the key benefits of the Latin American audience, or this is how I see it, and I'd be curious what you guys would think, is that Latin America is also the region of mega cities. And so potentially you can also have, growth that's very specific to a city and very geographically discrete. And you might have strategies and also metrics that are also geographically discrete. And this is something you'll also see, for instance, if you're in South Africa, most people will measure the 3 largest cities and really try to only have their product exist in those 3 places or something like that. And your growth strategy and KPIs are very much linked to the activities only in those cities.
Ali, how are you doing, man?
All right, I was having some technical issues.
All right, we got 10 minutes left, so lead us, Captain.
Yeah, so how about we do one last question from my list, and then we can go and start taking some questions from the audience. I think my last question for you guys would be, what's one piece of advice you'd like to give someone who's about to start doing, growth in LATAM or growth globally? All the years of wisdom and knowledge that you guys have, what would be the piece of advice that you guys would give?
From my side, I think what I have realized is there are many myths that are popular in the outside world, but might not be true for Latin America. For instance, I was really surprised when I saw that in a developing market like this, we have such a high ratio of people paying by cards and not by cash. And it took me by surprise. And there are many such minute things where I think we should not be prejudiced by our earlier notions of that, hey, this works, because here there can be something very different where you can gain, and we should be open to that.
I'd say if you're interested, I mean, it's pretty simple from my perspective. If you're interested in driving growth, for the first time, or really seriously diving into it, you really need to get in on the ground. Relationships are very, very important here. It's very relationship driven. And given that, like, I would imagine everyone on this panel, we have all those relationships. And so I would say reach out to all of us. I'm an open book. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. I'm an open consultant. I work with Rappi, but I work with other companies. So if you need a contact in any territory, I'm sure everyone here can connect you to anyone you want. At least for me, my email is skepnach@gmail.com. Just hit me up, and I'll be happy to
help. For me, it's figuring out like what you like within the growth sphere. I think that because it's quite new, there are all these different pieces of it, and some of us work on all like acquisition and engagement and revenue and partnerships, and some of us work on a specific piece. So understanding which of those pieces or all of them that you want to work on, and then kind of related to that, what stage of a company you want to work on. So I've worked at, like right now I'm back at a seed stage company. That's where I'm happiest. Like I like being able to see all of the different parts of growth and be involved in it. And it's a lot more operational, a lot more fires to put out all the time. And that's just kind of my speed. But also I've worked at more advanced companies where, you get to play, like the thing I miss most from that is having millions of data points. Like I do not have millions of data points now, and I cannot segment in the same way. And so if that's your jam, like think about doing a later stage company, or not a startup, but a corporation where you can actually play with those numbers a bit more. So just recognizing that there's real diversity in what growth is and trying to figure out what within it you prefer doing.
Awesome. Let's take some questions from the audience. So feel free to enter any questions you guys want, either in the chat or directly to us. I think this is kind of an interesting question. Maria asked us that because of COVID, you have a more elderly population that's now beginning to use apps and having to use web and mobile services. Usually, you don't really consider that part of the population when you're developing. And so, what are you guys doing to reach out or to engage the non-tech savvy segment of the population? Charlie, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah.
You had a smile, so I don't know if it's a good smile or bad smile, but you had a smile.
So this is not a lot. This is a story from Sub-Saharan Africa, not from LATAM, although I do probably have a story from LATAM too. But like, I think really doing a lot of user testing to figure out like what works and what doesn't work. And in particular markets, it might not just be old people or elderly people, but it might be also people from more rural areas, or like lower socioeconomic status who are using kind of phones for the first time. And what we would see there is sometimes you need to have like different specific language. You might also need intermediaries. So, you know, we used kind of like with mobile money, like tellers kind of to be able to explain to people how to use products. But, you know, it's a real challenge. Like in a lot of these markets, people didn't know what a password was. And they thought that you could freely share passwords. So they would like give their phone and give their ID number and their password to the teller and be like, do a transaction for me. So just trying to like, if you kind of do the user testing, like you will see that happen and you will realize that you need to put other kinds of checks into place, either on the product side or the risk side. And so just kind of really understanding that there are things wildly beyond your imagination that technologically new people might be doing with your products.
Yeah, from my perspective, 2 words: consumer insights. You nailed it. You know, I'm super passionate about this. I scream it from the rooftops. Like, understand your consumers, talk to them, get on the ground. Like it goes back to just getting on the ground, understanding who your audience is. And so if you want to hear me rant on about that, you can find me. I did a whole blog about Mobile Heroes, about consumer insights and how important this is. So you can go check that out rather than me ranting on here, and I'll pass it over to Sunny.
Sunny, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's quite similar. Maybe we can take another question. So since we have this time.
Sure. I guess so there's a wide income inequality here in LATAM. How do you incorporate this into your LTV analysis and in your setting KPIs for your growth strategies?
Charlie talked about this while you were the glitch in the matrix. Yeah, we just talked about segmentation, you know, just segmenting as much as possible, understanding those different, you know, cohorts and building out your LTV models based on what the data that you're seeing, trying to segment as much as possible was the summary, I think, of what he said. I was studying if you have anything to add.
Okay. Sunny, yeah, do you have anything to add to
that? Sorry, I'm not hearing clearly.
Oh.
Yeah, 1 minute left. So.
Yeah, there's 1 minute as well. Yes.
Any parting words for?
Yeah, how about we just do final parting words from everybody?
Well, I'd like to just say thank you for having me. You know, I know we're going through a lot now with COVID, and especially in the U.S. with a lot of protests. So, you know, I hope people are ready to mobilize and, you know, help each other out and be kind to each other. That would be my parting words. Thank you for having me.
Sunny, any final words?
Yeah, for me, I think it has been a really, really great experience being in Latin America. And seriously, I was really surprised with the development and growth in this part of the world, rather than the perception that I had earlier. I'm not sure if it's true for everyone, but it's much better and much highly developed than the perception. And I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to work in this moment, and really happy that today I got a chance to share my thoughts, and I'm very happy for that.
Charlie?
30 seconds.
20, because I want to talk for 10.
It's that emerging markets are difficult, but I think hold unique opportunities because people are scared to go into them. And so I think it's a really exciting space to be in.
Great. And I just wanted to thank you guys for coming today. It was really great to hear from you. Thank all the people that are watching the session. And, you know, again, feel free to connect